was a ghost, I was alone. 두어진
like driving a car, the 4K DLSS performance mode holds up well, and you won't notice much of a downgrade from quality in this area. At 1440p and 1080p, it was a little different, as some aspects to fine details are degraded at the lower modes, which are rendering the image well below 1080p. Reconstruction of wires in motion isn't especially amazing at these lower resolutions in general, but there is a small quality loss when dropping from quality to balance to performance, with more aliasing and sizzling along those edges. In situations where at 4K these modes held up quite well in terms of preserving these elements, at 1440p and 1080p you'd probably want to stick to the higher quality modes. With that said, the general stability of the image isn't substantially different between these modes, even at 1080p. If there aren't fine elements in high contrast scenarios on screen, it's unlikely you'll notice huge shimmering or sizzling issues with DLSS 4 even on the performance mode, though the faster the motion is, the more likely you are to spot problems. This isn't like FSR 3, however, where the image starts out with poor stability and it degrades further when turning down the upscaling mode. Disocclusion is one of the key areas that is degraded when turning down the upscaling mode. Across the 3 resolutions I examined, disocclusion artifacts get more noticeable at each progressive step down, with longer blur trails and more pixelation around moving objects. This is because when an object disoccludes, the background it reveals is rendered at a lower resolution using the performance mode compared to the quality mode, and this brief moment of low resolution rendering can be noticeable, especially around your character in a third-person game or around a swaying weapon in a first-person game. Some of the examples we've seen where disocclusion is especially noticeable, like The Last of Us Part 1, using the performance mode compared to the quality mode creates a grainier trail around Joel's head in motion. Balanced is an improvement compared to performance, but isn't quite as good as quality. How sensitive you are to these issues will be a key determining factor in whether you should reduce the upscaling mode or not. At 4K, this issue is noticeable, and it tends to get worse at 1440p and 1080p, so the performance mode at 1080p has worse disocclusion artifacts than any of the modes at 4K. This makes lower modes at lower resolutions less suitable, but it does depend on the type of game being played. Titles like Indiana Jones, for example, it's not a major concern, and disocclusion isn't seen in every frame. And some third-person titles like Dragon Age the Veilguard handle it a bit better, so it is a case-by-case thing. Hair quality is closely linked to image stability, so DLSS tends to handle this well across the 3 main quality modes. At 4K, there is little difference in hair moving from the quality mode down to performance, and it's only in the absolute finest strands where the performance image can be less stable, like we see in Dragon Age the Veilguard's character editor. In general gameplay, it's very difficult to notice any downgrade to hair in motion. At 1440p and 1080p, it's also quite similar to what we saw in the stability section. Balanced looks pretty similar to quality and retains a lot of the detail and stability we expect. Performance, though, can look a bit grainy in motion, especially when hair strands are moving. In third-person titles like Horizon Zero Dawn, where your character pretty much always has exposed hair, performance mode may look a bit too ugly compared to the other settings, but in other titles with less hair, it's going to be more usable. Particle quality is a simple one. Lowering DLSS modes, especially at higher resolutions, has little impact on particle quality itself, and these elements remain stable when lower modes are used. This is important for games where rain is involved. However, at lower modes, the challenges we saw with disocclusion come into play. Performance, for example, creates a grainier image behind the snow in Horizon Zero Dawn compared to quality, and this is more noticeable at lower resolutions like 1440p. Occasionally, with pixel or near pixel level particles, the spores in The Last of Us as an example, using a lower DLSS mode reduces the quality of the particles, increases pixelation, and can make large spore clouds a bit blurrier, but you'll only notice this to a significant extent when using the performance mode. Lowering the DLSS mode affects transparencies in motion, especially those that contain fine detail. Holograms that contain fine lines will look more pixelated when using the performance mode compared to the quality mode, especially at lower resolutions like 1080p. This isn't a huge issue while stationary, but elements that either move or rotate by themselves, or move due to character motion, can be problematic on those lower resolutions. Similar issues are seen when transparencies contain fine patterns, like in this Cyberpunk example, where different DLSS modes create different pattern artifacts. This sort of pixel level detail doesn't play nicely with lowering the render resolution and trying to upscale. However, not all types of transparency suffer in this way. Fire, for example, looks excellent at 4K, whether you use the quality or performance modes, and turning the resolution down to 1080p, it's only here with the performance mode that the occasional bit of grain or pixelation becomes noticeable. Along with disocclusion, foliage quality is one of the areas that gets the most noticeably downgraded when running DLSS at a lower mode. The main pain point is grass, with lower modes making grass look grainier in motion, especially if there is a combination of character movement and grass movement from wind. This can be spotted even at 4K when shifting down from the quality mode to balanced and performance, though it's more noticeable at lower resolutions like 1080p. At 1080p, even the quality mode can produce grainy grass, and this only gets worse when using the performance mode. As many games include high-density grass these days, and this can cover large portions of the screen, the reduction in grass quality is probably the most noticeable downgrade in many titles. With that said, DLSS 4 is much better at handling grass than previous versions of the technology, so relative to DLSS